Hi, this is Carrie Ann Reed Brown, and this is Carry On Friends, the Caribbean American podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 season of Carry On Friends, the Caribbean American podcast. And to kick off this new year and new season, I'm starting with a very special two-part episode. This two-part episode is really an audience takeover. I thought in light of the milestone year that Carry On Friends will be celebrating as a brand, not just a podcast, but Carry On Friends at its inception is celebrating 10 years this year. And so to kick off the year, I thought it would be great to have an audience takeover. And for that, I invited Kemoy, who is an active, engaged listener and member of the community, to come on the podcast and interview me, and me switching roles for the time being, right? So let me tell you a little bit about Kemoy. So professionally, Kemoy is a consultant. She's had experience working in e-commerce businesses with big retailers, Macy's, Sephora, etc. And she is well versed in the area of growing brands using customer-centric strategy. And she's now taking that experience to leverage economic growth in Caribbean and African communities. So she's taking what she's learned in major corporations and applying it to our communities. And so I'm excited for you to listen in on this conversation with Kemoy and myself. And at the end, I'll be sure to share with you how you can connect with Kemoy, and obviously always how to connect with me. So tune in to part one of our two-part series, our listener takeover with Kemoy.
Okay, hi, Carrie Ann.
Hi, Kemoy. We're full of K's today.
Yes. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to connect with you in this way. I'm here to say I am one of your biggest fans. I know you have many and plenty, but I am one of your biggest fans. So having this honor to actually be in reverse to ask you all the burning questions that has been on my mind as someone who has been actively listening and engaging with everything that you do, whether it be your content, your podcast, your social media, in person, your merch, like everything that you do, everything that you do with regarding to Carry On Friends, Breadfruit Media, and even I listen to your other podcasts too as well. So
Thank you.
everything that you do in serving the Caribbean community, you are truly inspirational to me and many persons who don't even realize that they need the inspiration, and those of us who know how important it is to have people like you producing, directing, inspiring, discovering, interviewing, and just connecting in this way and not being afraid and not letting any setbacks hold you back, and you just keep going. It's really inspiring. So I just wanted to make sure that I let you know that, because I discovered you at a time where I almost gave up on this. I was like, I didn't even think it was possible. And I think I Googled, and I believe, I'm almost positive that's how I found you, is that I Googled like Caribbean American something. And that's how I discovered your podcast. And when I discovered the podcast, I'm like, oh my God, this is a sign. So I just wanted to just say that and just put that out there, because this your platform and everything that you do is so needed, and it's adding so much value to the culture. And I and many other persons, as they continue to discover these platforms that you have, is only going to continue to get bigger. And this is definitely a part of your legacy, and you're going to be definitely one of the heroes in the Caribbean American community who's definitely contributing to the culture in many different ways. So with that,
Kemoy, thank you for that. I mean, I'm touched, and it's why I do the work that I do. It's less about me and more about the community, because I've been where you are, about to give up and was looking for something and didn't quite find it. So thank you so much for your kind words. Thank you. And I'm excited to have you.
So, with that said, sorry, I just had to say that to you because I always believe in giving people their flowers when they're here and able to receive.
Thank you.
So, the first question I would love to ask you is what what keeps you going and what's the legacy that you want to leave with Carry On Friends and Breadfruit Media? Like, what are the I would say that maybe the top 3 things that when someone looks at you, maybe looks at Carrie Ann Reed Brown and they see your name and maybe 100 years from now, what do you want people to know you for, and the legacy that you want to leave that people are going to know you for in the future?
All right. So I'll tackle the first part because I thought about it because I listened to a podcast the other day. What keeps me going? I honestly, it has to be God, because there are moments where I'm just like, okay, is it time to hang up and just like wrap this up? It's going on 10 years. Is it time to walk away? And I remember the first time I asked that question, my friends were just like, you are speaking blasphemy at the time. But I'm like, at some point, we have to evaluate. And I'm ready to walk away. And then people come and give me exactly what I need. And it's not anyone who I expect who would come and give me exactly what I need to give me that little piece of information or resource to address whatever friction I was experiencing, and saying, you know what, maybe this is a sign that I should hang up. Um, in terms of legacy, I've realized how much, I know it's a buzzword, but identity is just so important, right? And one of the things that I have to deal with, being born in Jamaica and now living in the US longer than I've lived in Jamaica, is that connection to the home country, right? And what that means for my kids, my grandkids, my great grandkids, and having a new form of storytelling, because we grew up in a culture where grandmothers told story. And so we're kind of, that part, the oral tradition in that way is different. And so the podcast, I now look at it like a new oral tradition. So the next generation can have something to go after. And my only regret is not recording my grandmother, my grandparents before they passed, because they had just so much knowledge. And so I'm hoping that my legacy is helping other people move through the different stages of their identity as you naturally go from single, married to mother, auntie, all these things, and have the podcast or whatever projects I do to help you navigate that, to get an insight as to what we were doing in 2015, 2019, 2020, how we were navigating that, because that's going to be so important. Um, and so it's just a resource or a reference. And I want my kids, when they're ready or at that age to understand, to come back to this. And it's like, oh, this is what mommy was talking about, because they don't get it now, but at some point they will. And I want them to, at a minimum, just have this to say, okay. And I guess selfishly, having gone through the loss of a parent recently, grandparents, I wish there were ways that I could connect with them. And audio, you know, in this way is something like my kids could use when I'm no longer here and they're like, "Oh, here's mommy's voice," and it's in I've had postcards when my grandmother did that, but there's something with the voice comes through, you're like, "Oh yeah, mommy's still here and she's talking," that type of thing.
And you mentioned that your kids may not get it right now. Why do you think that is? Because that's something that I think that's important with someone who's like me, first generation, born in a Caribbean household, but I was born in the US. And then now I have nieces and nephews who are now second generation, What do you think is the disconnect?
I mean, I think I've thought about this question a lot, and it's important to know that things change, right? And they're so different. There's this idea of nostalgia that we love, but we're not applying the things that we love about those nostalgic experiences into the moments of today. And it's much harder, right? So the other day I was talking to a friend, and I was actually talking to my sister-in-law, and I'm like, what's different with my kids, right? I grew up in a house full of cousins. When I lived in Jamaica, you walk out the street, auntie and cousins live across the street. They live next door. You go down the road, a next set lived there. And even when I came to this country, there was a house where a whole bunch of us lived in the house. And when it was Friday and everybody came over, we were all sleeping on the floor, like five, six, seven of us. My kids don't have that because by now everyone is spread out even more. They've moved further away. So when this happens, it's just really harder for them to keep connected to culture in the same way. It's just different. And so it takes them a longer time to, I mean, because when you were growing up, it's like, yeah, my parents are Jamaican, I'm Jamaican. Or kids, they're just like, yeah, I'm Jamaican, but or I'm Caribbean American, but it means it doesn't take the same meaning until they're older. And my daughter is a perfect example, right? She loved going to Jamaica when we were going to Jamaica. She knew all the songs. And there was a period of high school where it was just like, yeah, I guess they're Jamaican. All right, whatever. And as she's older, a young adult, she's just like, mommy, how come she start asking these questions as now the identity moving through the different stages of life, you're now trying to reconcile all these pieces. And so the podcast helps that because we have discussions around how we're navigating or connection and our relationship with culture as we move through our different stages in life. So for instance, I call it, my breakout period has been past and gone, right? So I'm navigating through a new experience. What does dancehall, what does reggae look like to me? Because I can't dash out and broke out like I used to, right? I don't go to dance or parties like that. So every one of us are going through a period of life, and at the podcast and the different guests and different ages, they have conversations as it relates to where they are in life and that relationship with culture.
And thus far, because you mentioned that you started this 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Started the blog 10 years
10
ago.
years
Thank
ago.
you.
And what would you say thus far in creating this platform in the many different forms? What has been your greatest accomplishment thus far?
I think the greatest accomplishment is connecting with audience members like you, Kemoy. I mean, what happens is I didn't do this, and I know that me personally. I'm not really on social media, but when I do get to connect with people in person, that's what I enjoy. And that is the greatest accomplishment. The people that I meet, this is a community of friends. And it's just so invaluable. The many people I've met who are now, I'm in community with, and that is the accomplishment. I can't think of anything else that trumps that.
And going forward in building community, what's something that you, in the 10 years that you started this journey, what are some things that you still would love to accomplish to see this platform grow even more?
Wow. That's a good question. A question that I fortunately had to be thinking about in the last couple months because of a program that I was in. But it's growth. Honestly, in any enterprise, it's growth. How do you reach more people? And how do you extend your capabilities to build a bigger team to do more of what you can do? Is just that you lack the capacity to do that. So reaching more of who needs to hear about the platform so we can also get more people to come on the platform and tell their stories. And so growth and reaching more of the audience, and it's always about creating content. I think there's so many stories to tell. I can't pack them all in Carry On Friends, which is why Breadfruit Media exists. And it's telling more of our stories because I was just talking about it the other day. Like, I love Desmond's. It was this old school British UK sitcom. It's about a Guyanese man. He owns a barber shop, and everybody comes into the barber shop, and Pot Pie and the African guy and all of them, they come into the shop, right? So it's not only Caribbean people. And I keep thinking, we have more stories like that to tell. Why aren't more of those stories visible, available, um, beyond the tropes, right? Beyond the stereotypes. And I want to be able to tell a lot more stories that my kids can, resonate with. Um, so I feel like there's more to do, there's more content to create, and there's just more fun to be had, and all of that. Yeah, growth and reaching more people and creating more content.
And in terms of challenges, what do you feel is the most challenging experience that you had thus far in growing your platform?
Um, the challenge is also a strength, and I'm only saying this because this is the feedback I've gotten over and over again. Um, the challenge is, everyone says funding, but funding is a big thing. Um, the challenge is, whenever I say Caribbean or whenever you say Caribbean, people automatically think that geographic region between North and South America, right? When we say Caribbean, we know it's global, right? And when I lead with that, or I say Caribbean American, maybe if I'm speaking to someone in the Northeast, they'll get it, because we have such a um immersive, and we have such a strong influence on culture. But everywhere else, I remember getting the feedback where, you know um Caribbean American isn't innovative enough, right? So it is that is the challenge, because at the end of the day, people are investing to make money or to get a return on their investment, and they just don't see it, right? And there's going to be a lot of no's, and that has been the challenge. And the challenge for me is to not take those no's as personally. But it's hard because they're in a way rejecting my identity, which is Caribbean American isn't bankable. You can't make money off of it. And that hurts. But at the same time, I understand, okay, this is your business opinion, and I just got to move on. So that's the hardest part of growing, that it's resources, and you're just going to keep bootstrapping, and just keep moving. And it's not always going to be easy bootstrapping, and you're going to get a lot of no's. That's the most challenging part of it.
And do you think the challenge with what you just mentioned, do you find that you get more resistance from persons in the community who are able to invest versus outside of the community,
It's
or
both.
is both? And do you find that we don't invest in ourselves as a community as much as we should?
So there's a episode that we did on Caribbean films, and
Yes, I heard that one. The guy
right?
from Trinidad, he was a director.
No, not that one, but that's a good one. It's before that. It's with Rachel Osborne, and she talked about why there are not enough Netflix and why we're not on Netflix. And the reality is, as a community, don't like to spend money, or they spend money, but not on certain things. And so in that episode, she did a really great example of, if a show is coming to Netflix and it's targeting a Caribbean audience or a Caribbean focus, if they're not getting the numbers that they expect to see after we're on the socials going rah 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 rah, and we're not showing up, then it's not bankable. So that's the business aspect. So this is why I said I understand the business element, but we're not always showing up the way we should show up to support the creators who are putting out the content that's there. um you've noticed, what I've noticed is that there are a lot of creators who are of Caribbean heritage, whether they're in the US or the UK, and they are allowed the privilege, or they really do a project that's Caribbean focused after they've established themselves as big actors and directors or producers or etc. So we have the small acts. He did that after he established himself, the director did. There was a film last year, Boxing Day. He's the director is from, I guess, St. Vincent. So it's like you have to establish yourself so then you can leverage your connection or your reputation to do these love projects that are a love letter to your culture and your community. Whereas I'm like, right out the gate, I'm doing this for my culture, I'm doing this for my community, and it's a little harder because they're like, who is this person? um so it's supporting our projects, and that support looks different to different people and different platforms. And until I mean, we could go on and on
I
about this,
know.
but
I know.
it's really supporting the creators, their platforms, not just in numbers but monetarily. Every other community, they have a membership base, they have ways to support their Patreons, whatever, and it's showing up in that way.
And do you think this will ever change, or what do you think is needed from persons like myself and other members of your community to help inspire others to think differently about how we invest and support each other?
I think that's a good question, and that answer is just going to look different, because you have to understand that people invest in what they like and what their interests are. And there's this thing about virability, right? Everything is going viral. Are you sharing your favorite show to your friends and your family? You know, that's the number one way that people hear about podcasts. That's the number one way people hear about anything. It's word of mouth. And so, how are you sharing this? How are you spreading, like, hey, here's this thing that you should check out and you should listen to? And because in the noise of everything else, it's very hard to find small content creators who aren't as viral but are creating good content. So it's the responsibility, or how do we share content and share that in a way that drives people, leverage your networks. One of the biggest thing that I've learned is just diversifying my network. And I thought I had a diverse network, and I realized it's clearly not as diverse as when I mean diverse, I'm not just talking in terms of race or ethnicity. I'm just talking diverse in terms of age, gender, everything, just diverse all across the board, because that's what's important, just so that other people might, I have colleagues who know other people of Caribbean heritage, and they could just say, "Hey, I know my coworker or someone, they're Caribbean. You should listen to this." So it's that thing of sharing the content. And I'm grateful that people did that even when they didn't really understand what a podcast was when I first started. So um it's tougher as we move into an age where everyone is now a content creator, and everyone is kind of vying for the same limited attention.
Okay. And do you find that, like, for instance, I don't remember the exact statistic, but there's actually more persons of Jamaican descent who live outside of Jamaica than living in Jamaica. Do you, in your experience thus far, do you find that the impact of migration also kind of helps to separate us from firmly identifying and investing in our culture as much, because we're like starting new lives outside of the island where we migrated from?
No. No, as a matter of fact, immigration is the migration is really what pollinates our culture, right? Your coworker just don't like curry goat or curry chicken. When they first came here, grandma and grand aunts or whatever, they bring the curry chicken and curry goat to work, and the coworker was like, "What is that smell?" Right? So as migration pollinates the Caribbean, the Jamaican culture, where everyone now is like, yeah, man, in the, I mean, of course, I'm saying it authentically, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
So it's what happens is migration tends to be depending on where you migrate to. If you're migrating to the New York City tri-state area, that's a very different immigration experience than migrating to, the Midwest or the West Coast. And sometimes, depending on where you move to, you just want to fit in and survive, as opposed to stand out, you know? And you got to, a lot of the conversations we have are like meeting people where they are in those experiences, because they're real experiences, you know? Um, that accent thing is the accent story is really one of the first reasons why I created the podcast. Like, you know, being told that you sound different or why you pronounce a certain word a certain way, or just really feeling like the oddball out. For some people, they have no problem being that. For other people, it's hard to do that and settle into a new country and culture. So you make a choice. And also, I think, going back referencing other episodes, because this is what the podcast does. Marlon Hill came on the podcast and he talked about how there was a benefit, there's like having a community or some kind of organization that help people settle in, because the adjustment from moving from Jamaica to the US, it's not easy. You have a climate adjustment first and foremost, as we're about to experience a bomb cyclone, right? You have a climate adjustment, school, there's so many things. And I didn't realize until I was an adult that my mother did the craziest thing, right? My mother took all of us came to America at the same time. So my mother was adjusting, we were adjusting, and that's a hard thing. And I think what I do when I do the podcast is always consider people where they are in their different stages of their immigration or their migration story. So, yeah.
Okay, so I love what you just said about meeting people where they are. Do you find, because I know you've done an episode about this as well, like in terms of like Caribbean nationals getting their citizenship, like because usually like if, for instance, in my family, I know my mom let hers expire because she thought that she couldn't keep her Jamaican citizen passport and keep and be a US citizen at the same time. And I know there is like a small community of persons like myself who want to live in both places and not necessarily stay in the US, but also want to have connections back home by actually being home. Do you find that as we continue to go on that becomes more challenging for persons who want to do that, who want to be connected to home by actually migrating back home versus staying within the diaspora? Like, what are your thoughts on that based on the guests that you interviewed? And I mean, someone like you mentioned in the beginning, that you've actually now lived in the US longer than you actually lived in Jamaica. So what are your thoughts on persons who want to migrate home and how that influences the affects or impacts the culture?
All right. So, couple ways to think about that, right? So, there's always been people who are like, all right, especially in the New York City area, Caribbean Americans, they're a good 50% of the hospital worker population. And most of them are working and saving money to build up their house back home and to go back home to live. The kids of those people came up maybe experiencing that, oh, mommy take and send all her money back home and they thief our money and the hosting bill. And so in their mind, they're like, I don't want no parts of this, right? But then there's another generation is coming behind that and saying, I don't know if I want to do this, right? So you have, again, meeting people where they are in their experience or relation to whichever Caribbean country's home country, that I want something different. Okay, America is going through some things. Maybe let me go back to the home country and see what that's like. And every one of those experiences are valid, right? The child who saw their parents work overtime, worked very hard and saved that money to build the house back home only to be ripped off. That's a very valid experience to acknowledge, right? And if they want no parts of that, so you have those, right? So each generation is having a very different experience, whether it's their experience living in the US amid racial and political tensions. And then there's the other thing of education, right? So yes, the US, and I may need to do a disclaimer, but whether they recognize dual citizenship is one thing. It doesn't mean that you renounced your Jamaican citizenship, because born in Jamaica, always a Jamaican. You understand what I'm saying? And your kids can be Jamaican, but again, it goes back to the knowledge and the information. Everyone is sharing funny videos. Some of these videos are great, but the critical information, such as you can get your US, your Jamaican passport and get it renewed and go to the consulate, to renew it. That information isn't circulating and it's widely available. We know it, but not everyone knows it. My kids can, and then there's the issue of it gonna take too long. I have to go up there. So again, it's education, and it's educating people about what the process is, and managing their expectation. And then we have cost, and everyone is going to have to deal with the cost. But the first thing is acknowledging people's experience with what relationship they're having with the home country, and what experience they're having with the adopted country that's making them reevaluate the relationship with the home country. And then there's the process. What's the process? Everyone has had varying or experiences of doing business back home and what that looks like. So there just needs to be knowledge and education. And a lot of times I try to give that. So that's why I did that episode. It's like, here's an option. And try it out and see if it works for you. It takes long, but it's available.
Yeah. So I'm one of the ones I found out by accident. I didn't even realize, and when I told my mom that I could apply for, she was like, "You can." And I've had family members like, "Oh no, you can't do that." And she was like, "Kemoy's doing it." And then I showed them the books, and I'm like, "Look, I did it." So I definitely see what you're saying in terms of education, because I forgot what I was searching for, and I found out by accident. I was like, "Oh, let me just try and see if I could do this and see where it would take me." The next question I wanted to ask was, and has been my experience in the last, I want to say since 2015, but 2018, that's when I became a Jamaican citizen in 2018. So I became very intentional about seeking out persons like yourself and figuring out how can I inspire others to support Caribbean owned platforms like yours, businesses using Caribbean made products
Mm-hmm.
on a daily basis. Like, that's my ultimate goal. That's why I want persons to understand, like, how important, even if you migrated, how important it is to support platforms like yours, and even just using products, what you eat, how you dress, everything. Like, every day I'm using and consuming something made by a Caribbean person.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the challenges I also find, and I think that's something that you're addressing with your platform, because even though you're Jamaican, you don't only focus on Jamaica. You interview persons from Haiti, like all over the Caribbean. What do you think is still needed to connect us? Because even like if you come to like a New York or Florida, we engage with people who are from Grenada, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, all these different countries, but then we still, even though we have a lot in common and we have a lot of differences, we still don't really know about each other as much as we should. So that's one of the things that I love about your platform. So what do you think more needs to be done, or maybe something that you're working on to continue to have people kind of like connect and learn more about our cultures and learning how we're similar, how we're different, and just having that affinity, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, yeah. Um, choosing, I certainly could have said, yeah, the Jamaican whatever, right? But I didn't. That was intentional because of my experience. Before I moved to New York, I had no experience with no other Caribbean person other than family members who went to Grand Cayman and come back or went to Bahamas, right? There's no experience with another person from another Caribbean culture. Most of my friends who I went to school with in Jamaica, their first experience with someone other than a Jamaican would be when they went to UE. Or and so my first experience with other people of Caribbean cultures when I moved to Brooklyn. And I learned so much. It was just such an amazing experience, right? How, my friends who are Grenadian or, Trini or, St. Croix, like all of that richness. And you learn so much. And that's how you know how we are similar, right? But as humans, we naturally we congregate and we herd into our familial groups, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I talked about this in another episode about identity. Within each of us, we're there's just so many intersections, right? So I'm black, I'm a woman, I'm an immigrant, I'm Jamaican, I live in Brooklyn, but I'm Caribbean. They're all of those identities belong to me. And not because I say Caribbean makes me less Jamaican, and if I say Jamaican, it doesn't mean that I'm less Caribbean. It depends on who I'm talking to, right? And so I think just embracing that if I say Caribbean, it doesn't mean that it's less of acknowledging that I'm from St. Vincent or from wherever. And I think leaning into, you know, there's more to learn about us, and not always saying, oh, it's, I people make fun of me all the time, say it's typical of a Jamaican just to have this, and I get it, right? But when we do come together, it's just so much more fun, right? It's fun. Look at Carnival. um it's just that it's just natural for people to want to create content that they are more familiar with, and sometimes it's vulnerable to say, oh, I didn't know that, you know in a conversation. And we've done that on the podcast, like, oh, I didn't realize that. And that's what Strictly Facts does. The
Yes, I was gonna mention that because I was
on
like having her podcast with Alex. I never heard about any of these things, and it's so important.
Yeah. Yeah. It's being okay saying that I didn't know this, right? Or I've learned a limited amount of Caribbean history when I went, like you learn some Caribbean history when you are growing up in the Caribbean. But if you were born here, you know none of that. And so it's learning all of that and being okay and saying, huh, I didn't realize this. Wow, this is really why there's crop over. Like, okay, I got you. So it's been okay knowing that I don't know a lot of stuff. And the more we come together, we can teach each other and then collectively teach a larger audience about us and what we are really about. And I think that's the first step, is just collaborating. And sometimes it's very hard to see who we want to collaborate with. And then we have to deal with our own internal family issues. Oh, I don't like this one, that one. And we'll get over all of that. But it's just people stuff.
And do you think, in terms of collaboration, for instance, with CARICOM, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I know that's a big thing,
Mm-hmm.
but CARICOM is essentially there to foster collaboration among the members in the Caribbean. Do you find that, how do you think that can be more successful? Because you're doing it on your platform by building this community of persons who are from these different nations. But what do you think is going to take for, because we only going to be kind of like what you mentioned previously about the business of promoting Caribbean culture and promoting platforms like yourself. Like, there has to be a business aspect to it. It's like, yes, we want to promote the culture. Yes, we want to keep the culture alive. Yes, we want to spread this information to the people, but it takes investment to do that. So if organizations like a CARICOM is struggling, I think that's also a sign to trickle down at that what it might be for like platforms like yours to also grow as well. So what are your thoughts on that as a community? Because CARICOM, there's so much money flowing into the Caribbean, but at the same time it's flowing out because a lot of the things that's owned in the Caribbean is not Caribbean owned.
So you bring up a good question, or a good topic, I should say, and I've been asked to address it, and it's just like, oh my God, this is a lot, right? So I think the first thing is, and we're not going to address it here, but again, if someone can, what really is CARICOM? What was it imagined to be? What is it now? And I think having that understanding is going to be critical. The other thing to understand is that CARICOM is really addressing the region, right? And what's happening in the region. And each country that is part of that organization has individual interests with their own diaspora. So you have the Jamaican diaspora, the Trinidad, the Guyanese, everybody. And so because of that, the focus is not on a global Caribbean diaspora, it's on each individual country's diaspora and their relationship or lack thereof with that. So it's going to be very hard because each country has a very different interest that they're trying to facilitate with their diaspora. And that's where the disconnect I feel happens, right? Because it just again, it's just because they're just different agendas. Nothing is wrong with that. It's just different, right? And then it gets complicated because it's just so tunnel focused in a way, right? So my niece and nephew have Jamaican parentage, my brother's kids. They have Guyanese heritage. What happens to those kids who have parents of different Caribbean countries, right? And so they, not having that understanding of what does a Caribbean diaspora council or whatever looks like. I don't know. That's beyond me and my pay grade. But that's kind of what you are leaning towards because as a region, we're stronger. And we know this by living in the diaspora. We are a very powerful voting bloc, all these different things. And so acknowledging that power in numbers, when politicians come around, they're not going to the Jamaicans, they're going to the Caribbean so and so,
Yes.
So it's I don't know how. I don't want to get into politics.
Yes,
That's
yes,
one of
yes.
the
Yeah,
reasons.
no, no.
But that is a missed opportunity every single time. Before I even started the podcast, even Caribbean bloggers have challenges I've heard working with tourist boards from whatever home country. They're passed over in favor of other non-Caribbean because and so it's always like, we have value. Why you think they won't come to so and so? Because we show off about it. Everybody now is going to Blue Hole. How you think Blue Hole exists? How you think all these places exist? And I think a lot that oversight, and that's why it becomes a very tricky conversation because you love the country, you love the culture, and sometimes you get, like with any family, exasperated by, you know, the lack of acknowledgement or appreciation for what we're doing in the culture. And so, yeah, it's challenging. And I just think that again, it comes back to more education. And there has to be an education campaign, like you said. Like I've been asked that question: what is CARICOM? What is the purpose of it? What does it do? And a lot of people don't understand it. So if you want people to engage from a civic level, you got to educate people, explain to them what is the value of this, why is it important. And I can only do that a little bit at the time with
Yes,
as much bandwidth I can manage.
yes, yes, yes. Yeah, it got me thinking because I'm like, if investing and making celebrating Caribbeanness, as I know that's not a word, but celebrating Caribbeanness as a business, wouldn't we need a stronger entity? It may not be CARICOM, but something where we all are connected in some way that spurs investment into our communities but not just seeking outside investment, but a way for us to invest.
And I think the important distinction is that CARICOM is addressing again, the community, but it's
Yeah.
more focused on the region. You're
Yeah.
speaking of what's happening to us here in the diaspora, and that's a very different entity. I know there are a lot of Caribbean countries who diaspora isn't as, organized like the Jamaicans are, with their diaspora movements, or maybe the Guyanese are. I don't know, but
Mhm.
it first begins with having an organized diaspora or an engagement with the diaspora, and then, but I think it's two separate things, because our needs in the diaspora and our interests are very different from
Yeah.
those who live in the region. And it's going to be, it's hard. Again, there are many attempts. I see emails about some diaspora things happening, but just okay. So
Yeah.
it really comes back to, you know understanding there are two separate things, and what is the interest. And it's just going to be hard because each country's trying to um
They have their own agenda.
their own agendas, and it's not a bad thing. It's just different, and it's hard to kind of come together on those things.
Because I think they are separate,
Mm-hmm.
but I think if we had a stronger foundation in the region, maybe the connecting in the diaspora would be a
Mm-hmm.
little bit easier. I don't
Yeah.
know if that makes any sense. So I kind of connect, well, what's going on at home, and then that might trickle down into what is happening once we move. So in terms of investment, your platform, for instance, I know this is very specific to Jamaica, but once Caribbean nationals migrate, because we do invest so much in the region, because when I'm having a little bit of a brain fog, but there's a significant portion of Jamaica's GDP that comes from the diaspora.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they monitor it because it's a lot of money, and most of the
Billions. It's billions,
yes,
because I
most
did
of
the
the
number.
I actually have a video, and I don't know why I'm slipping me on the exact number, but we are investing back home.
Mm-hmm.
And do you find, so we are sending a significant amount of money, is running that economy in Jamaica,
Mm-hmm.
and it's most of it is coming from the US. So do you, as a member of the diaspora, do you find that that do you feel that the diaspora gets the respect that they deserve based on the investment that we're doing back home?
um I can't speak for anybody else, right? I just know that personally, sometimes I just feel like, and we've all heard it, right? The customer service, like we buy the Caribbean products because we love them, and we're not always marketed to, because there's an assumption, or it's taken for granted, that we are going to buy it, right? And I think that's a missed opportunity, because I'm going to buy it because I love it, but my kids may not have that same affinity. So you still need to market to me and not take my dollars for granted. And I think that's important, right? You still need to market to me, because I'm in the diaspora. I have some disposable income, and I could choose now between whether I want to go to this country or that country. And my kids have the same choice. So I think, don't take for granted the diaspora. Don't take for granted that we're always going to come back and spend money, because that's when we just like, what, forget this. We still should be, we're not saying to worship, at least for me, I'm not saying to worship at my feet, but understand, like, yo, I love this country. I love this region. And I choose to spend my money here, so it's that kind of thing, because I've seen it. It's gotten a little better, I think, but I just feel like I'm not the one being marketed to. And when
Mm.
I go to work in corporate America and they hear my accent, guess who they're asking for recommendations? Me. They're like, I saw this ad. Should I go there? They're asking me. I'm the word of mouth. I'm the one that they're going to believe, not the ads. They're going to ask me to confirm if the ads are true every single time. Every single time. So, just there's value, because we are pollinating the culture. And so, just put some respect on the status.
That was well said. That was well said. Yes, because that's definitely a challenge being in the diaspora. Like, do you still feel like, And then it's kind of like like what you mentioned earlier. Do you find, and you mentioned it earlier, but do you find the longer that you live in the US, the less of a Jamaican you're considered to
Uh,
be?
anybody can say that to me. Know me, me know what my birth certificate says. I don't care. As a matter of fact, I have this conversation all the time that, when I first came to this country, my uncles, they had the worst accents. I went to an all girls school and you're supposed to talk all proper. And I was like, oh my God, why he sounds so horrible. And when I first went back to Jamaica, my cousin was like, Carrie, you sound worse than when you was living here, because we hold on to those things that we had that make us, that's part of our identity. And so we aren't less of a Jamaican. We are just Jamaican Americans, and our experience and our relationship to the culture and the home country is just different than if we were living in Jamaica all the time, full time. So it's not a less than; it is a different type of Jamaican. Like, but we're still Jamaican. It's just our experience is different, and it's the same across the board.
What is the future of Carry On Friends Breadfruit Media? What is in the what's coming up in 2023? What should we be excited about in 2023 based on your offerings?
Um, I'm just looking forward to having more exciting topics and guests. Growing the merch. Um, but I just feel like there's just more out there to discuss and dissect and have fun around, right? Because we don't always have serious conversations. We have light conversations, serious conversations, and I'm looking forward to having those, whether it's on Carry On Friends or it's on another podcast that comes under the Breadfruit Media family. And I'm looking to building and partnering and just I have a vision for so much, and I'm just looking forward to beginning to tap into all the things I really want to get to do. So I know that's vague, but it's also like it's just so much I want to do, and so I'm open to that. Especially after this year, I just don't want to put specifics. It's just like I'm open and let the opportunities come where they can.
And how can persons continue to support you in 2023? Because I know you mentioned sharing, you
Right.
mentioned social media, you mentioned um investment. So how can we continue to support what you're doing, and also continue to share with our friends?
I mean, listen, there's merch. You could share the merch. We do have a donate button on the website. You could donate. Those are all the ways that you can donate and support Carry On Friends, Breadfruit Media, and any other creative you want to support the way that they're creating content and what that means in terms of getting more eyes on the content, more ears, and really putting the money into, supporting with dollars. That's really where it is.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kemoy. This was so fun. Thank you for those are some tough questions. At some point I was like, but thank you so much.
Sorry.
Thank you so much for just doing this. I according to my friend Chris, I appreciate love you for because we don't eat, so I appreciate love you for just being such an active and engaged member of the community. Thank you for just always supporting and everything that you're doing to support Caribbean and Jamaican culture. So thank you, and I'm excited, and this is fun. Let's do it again.
Yes, we definitely should. So yes.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed part one of this two-part series. You can find Kemoy on Instagram, Kemoy_Kayan, or you could find her on LinkedIn. And as always, you can find at Carry On Friends across all platforms. Be sure to tune in to part two of our conversation. Thank you for joining. So until next time, walk good.